Okay.
All right. So first, I want to welcome everybody here to Hofstra University Museum of Art's virtual reception for our virtual exhibition. This was an exhibition, Nevertheless She Persisted, that was supposed to open on March 31st in our David Filderman Gallery. And obviously, we didn't have a chance to install it before we went out to do work remotely. So we have every intention, once we get back to campus, of actually putting the exhibit up so we can enjoy it in its reality. But for right now, we thought, well, Kristen, who is the associate curator and collections manager at the museum, spent so much time carefully and thoughtfully curating the exhibition. We didn't want to not acknowledge that, and then all the work that she had done. So Kristen, if you want to do the next slide.
Sure.
Okay. Just to, you have to be clicked on your.
I got it.
Okay, good. Yeah. So as I said, I'm Karen. I'm the acting director and chief curator, and Kristen Rudy is the associate curator and collections manager, and the one who curated this particular exhibition. And Martha Hollander was in my little view there. She's a professor of art history at Hofstra University, and she has graciously joined us to add her opinions and thoughts about this exhibition for us. So want to get started, Kristen, if you want to go to the next. So just, I don't know how familiar everybody is with Zoom. We're getting much better at it. This is our third virtual event. So we'd like to do to start with your microphones on mute. That just prevents some kind of any kind of background noise and feedback from everybody hearing it. We will ask, there's a lot of people on this call. We're up to 40 people. So if you would use the chat feature to ask a question or make a comment, that would be an easier way to do it rather than trying to speak it out. And as we discussed when we were first coming on, your viewing options are going to vary depending upon what kind of device you're on and how you're using Zoom. So it does make it changes a little bit depending upon what you're doing. So the next slide, Kristen, is.
Gosh darn it. Okay.
I think the next one is. There you go.
Okay.
So Kristen, take it away.
Thanks. Thank you, Karen. So to introduce myself, I'm Kristen Rudy. Again, I'm the associate curator and collections manager at the Hofstra University Museum of Art. And as Karen mentioned, I curated this exhibition, Nevertheless She Persisted, and worked on it for the better part of a year, and then was not able to install it. I swear to God, I'm not doing anything on my computer, and those marks are just coming, so I don't know what's happening.
So somebody else must have it turned
my
on.
hands are here. I don't know what's happening. So it's an exhibition, like Karen mentioned. We intend to install it whenever we can come back to the university safely. And as the title suggests, Nevertheless She Persisted. It is an exhibition of women artists from our permanent collection, from the Hofstra University Museum of Art's permanent collection. And you might ask, so why women artists, and why now? And to answer that, so the 2020 is happens to be the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which, as you can see, I've included the text and apparently underlined parts of it, that grants women the right to vote. However, it's important to note that while the amendment was signed into law 100 years ago, this fight started years prior. Many people think of the Seneca Falls Convention, but that, for example, that happened in 1848, so it was quite a long fight from that convention. And also to point out that the 19th Amendment only gave citizens, the right to vote. So for some women, particularly those not considered citizens at the time, Native Americans and Chinese immigrants specifically, and those disenfranchised based on race. The struggle continued and is ongoing even to this day. And so that was one source of inspiration, was this idea of the 19th Amendment, the 100th anniversary, and this continuous fight, the constant labor, often without recognition, that I was looking for in the works and artists that was selected in this exhibition. So I'm just going to give you a little overview, and Martha is going to speak more specifically about a few works, but I wanted to, when I was choosing works and artists for this exhibition, just to point out that Hofstra, the University Art Museum, has over 500 works by women artists, which is very impressive. And it was really only gallery space, which apparently now doesn't matter. I could have chosen all 500 works, but it was really only gallery space that kind of limited my selection of works. But it was also important to me not only to have works, like I said, that sort of have this inspiration of either in the personal life of the artist, with artists such as Howardina Pindell, who I know Martha will speak about, and Elizabeth Catlett, who I have an example of on the upper left, who had to kind of overcome racial and gender and pay inequality, but also the to show that there's still this belief, I think, unfortunately, of women's art, sort of like women's art or sort of a women's style, and to sort of also show the diversity of media, of style, and of material. So to show that this diversity, there is no such thing as a woman's art or a woman's style. And we have, I just to show some examples of figurative art, abstract art, sculpture, painting, you know, it really runs the gamut. So that these artists that were selected, while undeterred by setbacks and rejections, they're united not solely by their gender identity, but by their persistent fight for art, right? To create art and to celebrate art by all people. And that's really what I think is the key and the core idea and the core vision of this exhibition, and I hope eventually you all will be able to see in person. I also wanted to just mention that, you know, Hofstra, we're not alone in being celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment and taking 2020 to be the year of the woman or some other such thing that other museums are doing. That museums, you know, such as the probably the most, I don't know, famous is not the right word, but the biggest example of this is the Baltimore Museum of Art has announced that in 2020, all of their purchases, not their acquisitions, but their purchased art, will be women artists. So they will not be purchasing any works by anybody other than women. And so, you know, so there are these incremental changes being made and trying to make up for sort of inequalities in the past. So we're just trying to sort of show that this wide breadth of art. And so like I said earlier, Professor Hollander is going to speak specifically about a few works. And so I'm going to introduce her. Martha Hollander is a professor of art history at Hofstra and is also faculty in the Department of Women's Studies, and is currently teaching this semester a course on women artists, and which makes her a perfect fit to be our guest speaker for this exhibition. And she's a wonderful supporter of the museum and a great friend. So please, thank you, Martha. Welcome.
Thanks, Kristen. I'm going to do something that seems very rude and antisocial, but I'm actually going to stop my video because I know that sometimes it can affect the audio. So I'm only turning off my video so that you aren't distracted by looking at me, but also so that it might in fact prevent some audio problems from happening. I've noticed this with all the Zoom teaching I'm doing lately with, big classes of 40 students. So that's why I'm doing this. I don't mean to be antisocial at all. I'm smiling a whole lot behind this blank screen with my name on it. Anyway, this exhibit is really quite extraordinary. There's such a wealth of variety, different artists, different eras, different countries, different materials. Since there are so many of them, rather than zip through them all, which I think you guys can all do at your leisure, since you all have this PDF to look at on your own, I'd like to focus on 4 artworks in different media and their makers. They happen to be all American, and their careers span just about 100 years. And I want to start with Jane Peterson, who has this, there it is, yes, who has this beautiful painting. Jane Peterson, hold on, I beg your pardon. There we go. As you see from her dates, her career really spanned this period of enormous change in developments in art. And she's a really interesting example of an artist who is hugely successful and well known, but has since fallen into obscurity. And her work is well known among collectors and among curators, but really very little in sort of mainstream art history. So she is somebody who, since she's born in 1876, she studied at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn when it was newly founded, as well as at the Art Students League. And then she went to Europe. She went there all by herself in her 20s, studied with a variety of European artists privately, not at an institution. She got to be friends with Louis Comfort Tiffany, the glass designer and owner of the design company, and traveled extensively with him. She also traveled alone to North Africa and to Turkey. So she was quite unusual as a woman of her time, and she was hugely successful. She had her first one-woman show in 1908 when she was in her mid-30s, and in the course of her life, she had 80 solo shows, which is pretty amazing for just about any artist, man or woman. Her works were collected by all kinds of important collectors and institutions, not just by Tiffany. So she was very successful. She had professional positions in the Brooklyn schools, among other places, as supervisor of drawing, which is a wonderful category. So she had great professional success. She painted hundreds of paintings, and this painting of the Lagoon in Venice from 1920 is very characteristic of her spontaneous exterior scenes. And as you can see, it incorporates a lot of modernist ideas. There's some abstraction, fauvism, use of a lot of very, very brilliant non-representational color, the kind of stuff that she saw firsthand when she was studying in Europe. Right at the beginning of the 20th century. So you can see these broad, thick areas of brilliant color creating these effects of summer light. You can see the way the boat and the rigging and the workers on board are backlit, and they're in these sort of purplish and slightly yellowish tones. Which is very common in Fauvist type work, while the distant view of the Piazza San Marco is drenched in a sort of yellow-white light, and dominating the whole lower half of the painting is the reflection of all this activity in the water. so much of this painting is taken up with water and these extraordinary bold strokes. So the whole scene is very dramatically cropped like a photograph. So you only get a partial view of everything, and it's very typical of her work. She painted a lot of scenes in Venice, as well as street scenes in North Africa, and a lot of other subjects. I think she's an extraordinary painter, but very few people have heard of her. Except I think for curators and collectors. It's not entirely clear why she is not better known, except for the sort of obvious reason that so many women artists have not been well known and have been kind of left out of the record of art history, even now. 40 years after Linda Nochlund's groundbreaking essay from 1973, 50, sorry, called Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists, which has to do with women's lack of access to proper training and education before the 20th century. Women artists, that is. But then subsequent to that, I think the issue has really been women's lack of access to exhibitions. This was not the case with Jane Peterson, but somehow she did not achieve the kind of recognition that many other artists of that time had. Another interesting case of an artist who also began with great success is Pearl Fine. Can I have the next slide, Kristen? Thanks. Oh, I like that little blue line across the middle. It's kind of interesting. So Pearl Fine, who's born in 1905, who's sort of the next generation. Also, like Jane Peterson, 40 years earlier, studied at the Art Students League, and she became involved in an important group of abstract artists working in New York. And she showed in a number of group shows and solo shows in the 40s and early 50s, actually during a period where a lot of critics were very much against the ideas of abstraction and thought it was very trivial. But she nonetheless was in this group of important artists and did very well. But ultimately, she really grew to dislike the commercialism of the art world as it was developing, particularly in the 50s, with a lot of gallery owners who were promoting the abstract expressionists in a big way. And there were a number of gallery owners who actively refused to show women artists in their galleries because they felt that these women's work somehow violated this notion of the sort of intense masculinity of the abstract expressionists. And that was actually a rather typical attitude of mid-century critics and gallery owners and teachers, and it did a lot of damage to women artists' careers, like that of Lee Krasner and Grace Hartigan, for example, who were friends of Fine's. But she ultimately just turned her back on it, and she moved to the eastern end of Long Island, where she worked with a lot of she worked in this very well-known community of artists. She was very happy to be among artists and wanted to talk to them and look at their work and have them look at her work, but she was quite uninterested in the art world, which was driven so much, as she felt, by ego and money. So she only showed a few times in the 60s, and then she began teaching instead, first part-time at Cornell and then full-time at Hofstra for 11 years. So she also, to some extent, ended up being kind of written out of the record, and yet this somewhat later painting of hers, Convolution, with oil and pencil on linen, is quite an extraordinary painting, which shows a later shift in her work. You can see this against this background of very delicate grids. She's constructed this elaborate, almost cubist arrangement of intertwined and geometric forms. She's got these bold stripes of black and yellow and blue, all standing out against the plainness of the unpainted linen. A little bit like traditional Asian screen painting, and also very much under the influence of Mondrian, whose work she really admired for its serenity and balance. But at the same time, it's full of movement and layers and complexity, focusing on what Fine herself called, quote, an emotion about color, unquote. She was really so devoted just to the issue of work itself, which is what Kristen had mentioned earlier, that she ultimately really retreated, and although she was asked to participate in a retrospective show in the late 60s, she pretty much turned it down and just wanted to keep working. So if we follow that kind of theme of persistence in Fine's work, it really just had to do with wanting to work steadily and not even wanting to bother with issues of fame and profit. So it's an interesting example, not just of quite extraordinary work, but of somebody who ultimately turned her back on all of that. The next artist I wanted to mention, the photographer Mary Ellen Mark. Thanks, Kristen. I'm including because the world of photojournalism has been as male-dominated as the art world. And perhaps not surprisingly, most women photojournalists, aside from a few like Jessie Tarbox, Margaret Burke-White, Dorothea Lange, are unknown these days. There have been many working all around the world. There still are. And they had plenty of work, but they are simply not well known. Mary Ellen Mark had a very successful career. She published about 20 books. She got a lot of awards. She worked for a lot of news and cultural organizations. And most of her work has been documentary in nature, but she's generally focused on the lives of people, either on the fringes of society or people who tend not to be noticed. This particular picture of brothers going to church, Tunica, Mississippi, is from a series of 10 photographs called In America. And this image of two boys is very typical of her work because it draws you right in immediately with the tenderness of its observation. You see this very stark setting and the little tiny house in the distance down the lonely road. Maybe it's their house. And these two boys who are unposed. There are no parents in sight. They're turned away from each other. And each one, I guess, negotiating the bright sun in their eyes in a different private way. The older one is turning his head aside and intense in prayer. And the younger one is squinting against the light. And you notice their Sunday suits, the younger boy who has a little flower in his buttonhole, even though his jacket doesn't fit well and is too small. And the older boy's jacket is sort of blowing in the breeze. And you notice their seriousness and the strips of grass and the road behind them forming kind of a pattern that frames them like the cast shadows underneath. And this kind of attention to these momentary details and to the way that it captures the real humanity of her subjects is something that made her justly famous. I think it's an extraordinary photograph, and Hofstra's lucky to have it. The last artist I want to call our attention to is is a living artist, Howardina Pindell, who is essentially a formalist and interested in a lot of pattern and abstraction and so on, has also been greatly politically active. She co-founded a gallery in 1973, which was entirely women-owned and run, the first of its kind in the US. And during the 70s and 80s, she devoted a lot of her work to issues of racist and sexist bias in the art world. She also has had a very distinguished career as an artist, as an art historian and curator at MoMA, and after 40 years, she's still on the art faculty at Stony Brook. And this work, Genesis 2, has a lot of interesting ideas in it. It's a shame in a way. This is the one sort of three-dimensional work, I guess, in this exhibit, but I couldn't resist it because it's just very, very beautiful and complex. She does a lot of work informed by abstraction and minimalism and color field painting, which she encountered during her academic training at BU and Yale in the 60s, but also by a lot of mixed media. She uses dyeing techniques and graffiti art. She's also done work with video and photography in a very eclectic mix. And she's also interested in sort of ideas and conceptual art. And she often uses the form of a circle. And you can see she's got this wonderful object is actually constructed out of a whole lot of little circles cut out of board. She often uses a hole puncher on poster board, and she makes these grids of dots and circles of different sizes. And then she either spreads them out flat across the surface of a painting, or in this case, she's actually woven them together. And then she sprays or brushes them with paint and pencil. So here she's got watercolor and acrylic, pencil and oil pastel. So very, very brilliant and intense colors. And the theme of, I guess, creation, because of the title, Genesis 2, suggested by the circular forms are enhanced by the threads that hold all the pieces together. Which connects to the creative art of textile, which also recalls the kente cloths that are woven and used in Ashanti culture, which she knew about because when she was a curator at MoMA, she worked on this exhibit of African textiles. So I think it's a really interesting piece because it brings together this idea of textile and the art of textile, along with more traditional two-dimensional art forms. And also that textile work has in the past been associated with women's work. And there are not a lot of other women working in the 70s in particular who became interested in textile. And the kind of patterns that existed in textile art. Some of them are in this exhibit, actually, like Miriam Shapiro. But I thought it was a nice image to end on because it is three-dimensional. And so this is our little defiance of having to do a Zoom meeting, but also because she is a living artist and because she's devoted so much of her life, not just to these issues in her work, but to social and political issues as well. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Martha.
Sure. I'm going to try to turn on my video. I assume you guys could hear all that?
Yes.
Thank you, Martha.
Sure.
That was wonderful.
That was wonderful.
Well, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be able to, I mean, it was hard. I told Kristen before, do I really only have 4? Can I talk about all of them? You know, there's no way that I really could. It was hard to choose, but I wanted to balance media and style and approach, and also to look at women who've had rather different career trajectories over the course of the century.
Yeah.
Anyway, I really love this one.
It's a wonderful work, yeah. but
Yeah,
incredibly difficult to reproduce.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
But if anybody has any questions or comments they'd like to make, feel free to add them into the chat box, or as long as we don't over talk each other, if somebody wants to just ask it.
Yeah. We'll move on to our.
Oops.
And yeah, just to note that if you visit our website, hofstra.edu/museum, and you click on the "Nevertheless She Persisted" box, we have a interactive catalog that you can flip through, and also like a Flickr account, so it has all the works and the label copy that would have gone with it, so you can explore the exhibition in more detail if you are interested.
Oh, I see questions in the chat.
Yes.
Someone would like to
So-
talk about how we chose the title. Nevertheless, she persisted.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's actually, I will say it was a group effort to come, yes. So it's obviously, it has a political influence on it, because it has that, Nevertheless She Persisted sort of has this origin in 2017 of, I think it was the nomination of Jeff Sessions, that Elizabeth Warren was trying to read a letter by Coretta Scott King.
Right.
And yeah, so this idea that what I like about the title, and I think why it works for this exhibition, is actually, if you think of the full quote, is actually, she was warned, she was given an explanation, nevertheless, she persisted. And I think that idea that these women artists and these women were given explanations, they were warned of what they might come up against or might endure, and yet they continued their work. I think it also speaks to, like I said, sort of this inspiration of the suffragette, of the women working for women's rights, that this idea of persistence no matter what. So that's how we kind of came with that.
And I think that, early on, we knew we wanted to do an exhibition this year with the women artists from our collection. But we wanted it to just be more than just, oh, it's a bunch of women artists. We wanted it to have some greater meaning and some, why are we choosing these artists? Why are these ones together? So that kind of goes to the theme of the exhibition. It's really about the overcoming, a struggle, and keep going, and that, keep trying, even though you're not getting anywhere necessarily, getting the exhibits that you should get or you feel you deserve. So I think it was that too. And Susan Yan, hello, Susan, wanted us to go back to that slide with the 3 that you started with.
Sure.
And if you could just mention those works, the title.
Oh, the 4 of them?
The ones that you, that slide, yeah.
Oh, those, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just sort of, similarly to Martha, I didn't know how to limit myself, so I just tried to give this is my side of trying to show the diversity of art and artists in the exhibition. So, so on the top left, the 2 women, that's a work by Elizabeth Catlett called Gossip from 2005, and that is a print with a photolithograph. Elizabeth Catlett her story is incredible and really deals a lot with persistence. She's an artist who she was a granddaughter of slaves, and was one of the, attended Howard University after being denied entrance to another institution based on her race. She was the first woman and the first African American to get a degree from or she was the first African American to get a degree and the first woman to get a degree in sculpture from the University of Iowa. And she has a very interesting story. She ends up working in Mexico with a very politically active graphic arts organization down there, and actually ends up being investigated by the House on Un-American Activity in the 1950s, and actually has her citizenship revoked for a number of years because of her like revolutionary art, because she was creating art that was socialist and focused on women and African Americans and Mexicans, Mexican culture, sort of, right? That was her. She ends up settling there. And the work on the bottom, that is a work by Marisol called Fishing. And it's another work, it's our other sculpture in the show. So to show there's a little, we have this diversity. It's a work by, work in resin, acrylic, not resin, I'm sorry. Marisol, another very fascinating figure, sort of similar like to what Martha was speaking about, Pearl Fine or Jane Peterson. She was wildly popular, in the 60s, working, but she sort of just went into obscurity, and we kind of forgot about her, and she was sort of written out of art history because she didn't quite fit that mold, that she didn't fit into pop art perfectly, and she didn't fit into minimalism. So she was sort of, written out a bit, and luckily she's gaining, her prominence is returning with better research and exhibitions on her work. And on the right is the work that I've used for sort of the promotional materials for this exhibition, because I love it so much and I think it's so bold. And it's a work by Louisa Chase, also a lithograph from 1988, an untitled work. And Louisa Chase, again, another artist who was working and was very successful, working in the 80s with artists like Basquiat, and but not nearly getting the attention of an artist like Basquiat. And I think also similarly doing research for this exhibition, it's also you find that a lot of artists sort of like Louisa Chase sort of experiments with a lot of different styles, with a lot of different media, or she starts in painting but uses prints a lot, became her sort of favored media. And that kind of, because you can't have you can't say that's like a typical this or typical her experimentation sort of like, I don't know, kind of it was hard to categorize her, so therefore she did not fall into the canon, right? Sort of that idea.
Such as it is.
Right.
But I think that happens not just with women artists, but other artists who don't,
for sure,
who don't fall into a accepted style. They're other, and they, you tend to, when you're teaching art history, it tends to be by these different styles a lot of times. And somebody who doesn't fit a category, it's hard to, hard to place them in there when you're talking about.
right.
I think that even extends to exhibition practice as well. That's again is part of the problem. And so people whose work doesn't get shown a lot, or who gets shown in sort of isolated contexts, their work does not remain that well known. partly because, if it may not fit into a particular category, or it changes very dramatically over time, or whatever it is. So there's and those are problems, of course, that exist for all artists, but it's a sort of double whammy, I think, for women. Still.
Yeah.
Still. I mean, and Kristen and I and Martha, we have talked about this before. I mean, there are some great strides being made, and I had noted in the comment box before, Jane Peterson just had a big retrospective traveling exhibition. Mattituck Museum in Waterbury, Connecticut put it together a couple years ago, and it traveled to 5 different museums, in the U.S.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was great, and our painting, the Venice Lagoon, was in that exhibition. An exhibition that's coming up, as everybody who knows me knows, my favorite is our Joan Mitchell Metro painting, which is not included here, but that painting, the Baltimore Museum of Art, in conjunction with the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, are putting together an international retrospective of Joan Mitchell's work, which is supposed to open in Baltimore in September. So that's the first time that Joan Mitchell, who's a major abstract expressionist painter, is really finally getting her recognition with a national exhibit. And actually, I have to say, Howardina Pindell also just had, a couple years ago, had a national exhibition retrospective of her work. Very long overdue, but finally did get something. Yeah. So I think it's slowly changing.
Slow and steady.
Okay. So does anybody have any additional comments or questions or things they want to
There's
know?
some comments on the chat.
Yeah, another comment. Yeah, the Howardina Pindell, that photograph just does not do it justice. It is an amazing piece in reality, and it's
Trying, yeah.
I know
See the colors.
The colors are beautiful, yeah, but the dimensionality of it and the way it's basically thread, and kind of almost sewn together. The delicacy of some of it too,
Kind of like a close-up of a kente cloth almost.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful piece, but it's really amazing the way it's put together too. I think that can't really convey that in a photograph. That makes it difficult. Let's see. Somebody mentions the catalog. So Kristen did refer to our website, and we do have a PDF of the exhibition catalog on the website, so you can see all the other images that we didn't show you everything in the exhibition. And also the Explore the Exhibition button does show each work with the label copy that Kristen had prepared for the exhibition, so that you can actually kind of go through each piece, and with Kristen's commentary is there with the image. So you can kind of, sit with them a little bit more. So any other additional comments or questions that anybody has? So we do want to bring up, we've been doing virtual events. As I said, this was our 3rd. So next Thursday, we're trying something different, not on Zoom, but on Instagram. One of our museum educators, Anne-Marie, is going to lead a little hands-on art project on Instagram Live. So you have to have Instagram, and you have to follow us on Instagram in order to do that one. And it's just, you just need paper and markers and, color pencils or something like that. You don't need a lot of difficult supplies to get. And then on Thursday, April 30th, we had originally planned in conjunction with Nevertheless, we were going to show the documentary Women Art Revolution in the Guthard Theater with everything, like we normally would do as film screening. So we've been able to get the rights to do a streaming version, so that people will have the opportunity to view the documentary streaming first, and then we're going to do an online discussion. We haven't set that completely up yet, so it's not, you can't register for it yet. But all of our programs are on the museum's calendar page on our website. They're also on the Hofstra events page, if you look at Hofstra events. And also in our social media, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, we put them out there too, all of the registration things. So just kind of keep up, and we can see you again, hopefully, for some of these other events. Then feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions. We're happy to answer.
Yep. We're here.
So, yeah.